This is Carbon Mike, and you're listening to Flashpoints, the Geopolitics and Current Events podcast, October 2022. A lot has happened since the last time we spoke.
A vast amount, and most of it not very good. My interests obviously are familiar to you, and this means that I have to look at these things more or less on a daily basis. And every time I've thought, I know what I want to talk to Mike about next time we sit down and do this, something else happens.
Yeah.
Something else happens somewhere else.
Yep.
I think I said to you a few weeks ago, concept for this conversation could be issues around nuclear first use, which at that time seemed almost a fantasy topic of conversation, and now it seems something that everybody's discussing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think a lot of analysts are listening for the sound of nuclear saber rattling where there isn't really. That's my take on it. In other words, everyone knows, even though it's not usually said in polite company, that if you threaten a nation kinetically to the point where they might have to use their nukes or lose them, they're likely to use them. That's the whole point. And again, we don't like to talk about it because it's almost too terrible to imagine, but that's how it is. Now, it seems to me that that's more or less, at least the stated posture, as I understand from Mr. Putin's recent comments about nuclear use. What's your take on this?
What I'm worried about, to be honest with you, is that threshold for reaching for the button is getting lower. And I think it's getting lower because it's becoming normalized to contemplate it. And there are some pretty terrifying figures writing in the British press who are contemplating how to fight and how to win a nuclear exchange. And some of these guys have really surprised me because they're ex-military, who are usually the last people in the world to want to go to war. Notable is a guy who is the ex-head of our nuclear, biological, and chemical defense within the British Armed Forces, and he's been writing in a way that suggests he's almost eager to see these things taken out of their box and dusted off, and this surprises me greatly.
Yeah,
and the language seems to not be about de-escalation, but instead re-escalation. And I sort of get the feeling that we're being prepared for this. The message is becoming so coherent that I think it's almost they're expecting it to happen. And everybody's going to think, well, it's not going to be us first. But whether that's the case is a different matter for the reason that you just cite, use it or lose it. But I did say when we discussed this a few weeks ago that I would refresh my memory about French nuclear policy. And it turns out that it's absolutely perfect for this topic of conversation that we're just on right this moment. The French government, this is what they say, the French government reserves the right to conduct a unique and one time only limited nuclear strike to demonstrate to an aggressor that the nature of the conflict has changed and that France wants to re-establish deterrence.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's not good.
No.
That's not good at all. I mean, well, maybe it would be good to just talk about kind of how we got to where we are, or even just what's been happening lately. Now, the very first Flashpoints conversation you and I had was near the beginning of the Ukraine jump off, the so-called special
Yes.
military operation. Um, since then, it seems like if I could sketch a crude picture of it, what seems to have happened is that uh, initial negotiations failed, um, largely on the say so of the United States and the Western powers. Um, Russia originally went in rather soft. Actually, they seem to have sent a reconnaissance in force that was relatively unprotected, as in the first phase. A lot of those guys got lit up, it looks like. So they took a relatively high rate of casualties. But after that phase, when things ticked over to the next phase, um, it seemed like a classic maneuver warfare scenario in which, uh, unsurprisingly, at least to me and to other people in my circle, um, Russia had the advantage because of their sheer combat mass. A lot of the ground fighting seems to have been done in this war by the militias of Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. That also makes sense to me because they're the people who've been really under attack from the government in Kiev since 2014. A lot of the long throw, a lot of the standoff munitions seem to have been used by the Russians. They've brought their weight of artillery to bear on the conflict. They've used some air, not that much. A lot of artillery, a lot of rockets, a lot of guided missiles, and so on and so forth. And steadily in this war, it has seemed as if, um, one, every avenue for negotiation has been systematically closed off by the Western powers. Every now and then, when even within the Ukrainian parliament, Zelensky's senior people are saying it might be good to sue for peace. Some representative of the Western powers or other will say, no, now is not the time. You're going to turn this around. Don't sue for peace, what have you. And now we've come down to, and by the way, there have been periodic warnings throughout that well, Russia's about to run out of people. They're about to run out of ammunition. They're about to Vladimir Putin's about to keel over because he's got cancer. Um, all these kind of I can't think of it as anything other than wishful thinking on the part of Western neocons. But somehow the Russians have stubbornly refused to run out of ammunition. They surprisingly they seem to understand how to conduct maneuver warfare. I guess now the latest thing is that Russia's running out of time because Russians don't know how to fight in the winter. And now here we are with it looks like the stronghold of Bakhmut, which if I read my maps correctly, is more or less kind of central in that Donbass region. And I've heard competent analysts say that if Bakhmut falls, that's kind of the hinge point. If Bakhmut goes, then it's all over except the mopping up, essentially, as far as the Donbass war is concerned. That's where I stand on it. And so now I think what we're seeing is this last, hopefully the last spasm of freakouts from Western neocons and so forth. And a lot of this includes nuclear saber rattling, and then there's the projection that, well, the Russians have threatened this, but I'm not perceiving that. I'm seeing that people on our side, and I think you're right. It seems as if we're being prepared for nuclear war. I'm seeing public service announcements, which I never thought I'd see in my lifetime after the Cold War ended, about what to do in the case of a nuclear detonation. I mean, this was New York, the government of New York City actually published a PSA about this. Extraordinary. So that's my take on where we are now. How do you read the run up to the current unpleasantness?
Well, just sticking at the level of the nuclear for the moment,
Yes.
because I think the warfare position on the ground is pretty fluid, and I think you're talking about Bakhmut being a sort of critical point and so forth, and I think you're right, but I think there are several things on the ground happening, which means that it's quite difficult to discern which way that's going to turn. And the Russians certainly did suffer quite a significant pushback in the north, but in the south that hasn't really quite happened to the same extent. I mean, there's been some argument about, the Ukrainians have crossed the Oskil and so forth, but I think it's too early to see what happens. But I think this winter will be critical to the outcome of the ground war. I think that's certainly the case. But staying at the nuclear level, as we know, Vladimir Putin personally rewrote Russian nuclear policy in 2017,
Mm-hmm.
and had that adopted into law in Russia. And this is the doctrine that allows first use if there is an existential threat against Russia, which on the face of it is a perfectly reasonable position for a country to take. If you think you're going to be overrun and the last thing you have to use is nuclear weapons, you're going to use nuclear weapons. At the time when it was revised, I thought, well, this is a bit silly because nobody's going to overrun Russia. Why would we do this? How could we even try and do this? It seemed a fantasy. But then we have this latest situation in which Russia appears to be a country that is expanding quite rapidly.
Yes.
And just looking at the legal point of it and setting aside any likelihoods, the referendums all concluded as they did in the high 90% or whatever it was. The 4 regions concerned joining, provinces maybe is the better term, joining Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect within a few days this is going to be duly put to the Duma, and the Duma is going to say yes, these provinces should become part of Russia, and it'll be duly ratified. Now, what this means is that Putin has put himself, by initiating these referendums, into a very, very interesting position, because we know that any leader is vulnerable, no matter how firm their rule is vulnerable to people who are both on one side or on the other of their position on a given matter. And in this particular case, he's got a lot of people around him who would like to have been much more aggressive. I mean, this is well documented. But he's also got a lot of people around him who are uneasy about the war in Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what he's done by initiating these referendums, and he did do that personally. That was something that he drove. Is he's created a little bit more Russia, and that
Yes.
little bit more Russia is legally within the existential threat first use umbrella of the law as he reframed it in 2017. Now, either he reframed that law in cognizance of this moment, which would be a remarkable play, or he didn't. But if he didn't, he must have been thinking before he initiated the referendums of that law, and whether that would turn around to bite him if he did or did not employ its provisions. So in other words, has he painted himself into a corner whereby his job now depends on using Russia's nuclear arsenal as a threat to get Ukraine to leave what will in a week or so's time be Russia?
Interesting. I can't see that your question is very well posed. I don't see that that's the case. I mean, let's think about this for a second. I mean, again, for all we talk about written doctrines about first use, the fact is that the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons in conflict is my country. And
Yeah.
we were in no danger whatsoever of being overrun at all. We weren't even in danger of being defeated on the battlefield.
No.
Okay? So
Yeah.
that was the prototypical use of nuclear weapons. Now, since having seen what these weapons can do, I think the nuclear nations of the world saw that clearly it wasn't in anyone's interest to get into a fight using these weapons, and so we developed these doctrines, what have you. But what I'm saying is, I don't think anyone necessarily needs a legal excuse to use nuclear weapons. What I mean is that if the time comes when someone decides to employ any kind of battlefield weapon, really, that is that's a point in history that's way beyond law or any understanding of law or any legal position or anything like that. So I think we have to pull back from, what is written in this doctrine, whose nuclear posture is thus and so, and go right to what the battlefield realities are. And look, the battlefield realities are this. There's a lot of argument about this, but there is no, I don't think there's a rational universe in which Russia is losing this war. They're simply not. Now, is it taking longer than they might have hoped? Well, maybe. But again, many of the analyses that talk about an increasing Russian desperation to bring this thing to a close assume facts not in evidence. None of these people are actually talking to the Russian general staff. So aside from that first reconnaissance in force in the very beginning of the operation, when clearly they thought that they would have more, they clearly weren't looking to get ambushed. They didn't think that they would get ambushed. They thought they'd get more support from the locals. Aside from that, it's not clear to me that the Russians are on any particular timetable. Where's the time constraint for Russia to get this thing done? They know how to fight in winter. They apparently can outproduce NATO in terms of just the sheer volume of munitions all day, every day. Okay. And, despite everyone kind of screeching about this partial mobilization, the fact is that what they did was call up reservists. That is, people who had already agreed to serve. Okay. But
Yeah.
most of this war has been conducted with a relatively small expeditionary force on the Russian side. And on the flip side, Ukraine has expended very many of its best trained men. What happened to their elites, the Azov battalion in Mariupol? They got bottled up and
Mm.
pounded until they came out with their hands up. Okay, and now it's to the point where everyone knows this. The Ukrainians are calling up 40 and 50-year-old reservists. They're sending people to the front with less and less training. Okay, so
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that I'm not worried about Russian desperation causing Vladimir Putin or anyone else to
No, no,
push the button
no.
to turn the key. I think that the desperation that I sense is comes from the Western side, comes from the fact that, let's face it, the Western powers, the neocons, the Euro cartel, what has happened in this war is that their money laundry got busted open. And they're freaking out. And so they're the ones I'm worried about. I mean, we've got to talk about this pipeline explosion, this
Well,
holding of the right.
we will absolutely do that, because I
Yeah.
mean that is the really key
Yeah.
latest development, isn't it? For obvious reasons.
Yes,
But
sir.
I just want to push back on this one point in terms of
Yes.
the desperation on the part of the Russians. I don't think that they need desperation as a reason to bring the threat of nuclear weapons into play. And what I mean by that is that I don't think they see nuclear weapons in their own terms or from their position as being particularly special. I know they know that the West thinks they're a hugely big deal. But we have to remember that their battle plan for the Third World War in Europe,
Yes.
which of course never came to pass in those terms, um, was to use tactical nuclear weapons on the first day of it,
Yes.
to hit the NATO air bases and the communications nodes, and they weren't interested in an escalatory process. They simply assumed that sooner or later those weapons would be brought into play, and they were determined that they would use them first, because that way they still have them. And
Yeah.
so I don't think they are. I don't think they are like the Western posture is, or appears to be, particularly reluctant to employ them. And I just think that once we have these new pieces of Russia, regardless of whether or not Putin will use nuclear weapons, we can't know even if he would be allowed to, even if his military forces would actually deploy them, because of course he can't launch them personally.
Right.
But it does give them the ability to say to Ukraine, you seem to have a lot of tanks on our front lawn. How about you get them off it?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we are going to start targeting you at a higher level of kinetic power than we have done so far, and leave it ambiguous as to what they mean.
Well, here's the thing. I see what you mean, and your logic is sound. Here's the thing, though. This is mostly about an internal legal framework for getting things done in this war in Russia, right?
No, absolutely.
Okay, so as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, I think I see what you mean, and I tend to agree with you. They don't necessarily think that they don't have the same
Squeamishness.
Yes, exactly, squeamishness. But on the other hand, they are big infrastructure people. Okay, now the fact is that no, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to, on a whim, or even on something stronger than a whim, irradiate a lot of their most fertile farmland. Okay? I don't think that they're going to, on a whim, irradiate a lot of their energy resources. Okay? Because you can't burn radioactive oil and you can't burn radioactive gas. Okay? So, and more to the point, especially not when there is no reason for them to do it. They can land rounds anywhere in Ukraine they want, all day, every day. They've been doing that from the beginning. They've just been going. This is the fundamental thing we have to go back to. They've been going soft. Everyone knows this, except the Western analysts. It's like most of the pressure he's under from his senior military people is them saying, how much longer are you going to let us get kicked around by these guys? When are we going to get serious? That's what that is. Okay. We know he can land rounds anywhere in Ukraine he wants. He hasn't even really brought in the Air Force in any significant way yet. Okay.
No, indeed he hasn't.
Right. So by saying these people are threatening Russia, these people are now on Russian territory. Okay, all he's done is created a legal framework to go and do what everyone is clamoring to do. But it seems to me that the way he thinks, he is known to have a kind of a highly legalistic mindset. Okay, so he doesn't want to just goose the throttle on this war without any framework for how to conduct it. This is the framework for how to conduct it. Our objectives are thus and so. This is the territorial parameters and so on is what we have to do, and this is how we will know that we are done. Okay, and then he can pull the trigger on that. Okay, so what I see is that definitely a ramp up in the combat mass being brought to bear, in the kinetic power being brought to bear. But he doesn't need nukes for that. Not at all. Why?
Okay. So fair enough. So your take on this is that he's not going to use them. Do you think he's going to threaten to use them as a lever on Ukraine?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think he needs to. Because he doesn't need to put himself into a position where someone can call his bluff. Okay, it seems to me that he bluffs very rarely, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So that is the one thing he really won't want to do, is to bluff. So that's why I'm so interested in this, is because if he says he's going to do something, it will almost certainly mean he then goes ahead and does it.
Does it, exactly.
So what I'm looking for is these tripwire signals that tell us that we are into that new and expanded scenario, whereby he's actually progressing towards the point where he's not going to bluff anymore and just simply do it.
Well,
that's really what I would. That's really where I was coming from.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
That's for me is why it's an interesting topic, is because he won't bluff.
Yes.
So if he threatens it, we have to take that, I think, pretty seriously.
Yes, I agree. But let's keep in mind that he didn't threaten in the beginning. When he talked about nuclear weapons, all he said was, certain of our friends in the West have, in that kind of circumspect way he does, certain of our friends in the West have talked about nuclear weapons. Just please remember that we have weapons too. We also have specials in our inventory, right? And that's kind of the way he talks. Okay. And look, I think that's the way any leader that's got balls, to put it bluntly, is going to talk. Like, okay, you can say what you want, but we've got something for you too. Just so calm down. You know what I'm saying? That's
just so we're all clear.
Just so we're all clear. Just so there's no misunderstandings later. Okay.
Yeah.
But again,
all right,
he doesn't need to use nuclear weapons. Why? He seems to be able to pound the bejesus out of the best and brightest Ukraine has to offer, which means the best and brightest NATO has to offer, which means the best and brightest the U.S. has to offer. Let's be real about it. He seems to be able to pound them into gravy all day and all night with no real problems. I mean, even the Ukrainian defense ministry has admitted that there's an enormous discrepancy in the throw volume. How many rounds of ammunition.
Absolutely.
And in casualties per day. And in casualties per day, right?
No. So, I mean, the casualty figures, of course, none of these things can be trusted from either side, because everybody lies about how many losses they're taking and inflicting.
Well, yes, but
it's almost impossible to know, really.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, if the Ukrainians themselves are, in other words, I don't believe the Ukrainians when they say they killed 10,000 Russians yesterday, but if the Ukrainians themselves are saying that they're taking hundreds or thousands of casualties per day during a particular offensive.
Yeah, that southern offensive was very expensive.
Was very expensive for them. And by the way, and what did they get out of it? Not much. Look at the map. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. When I take Ukrainian estimates of their own casualties when they're arguing against interest a little bit more seriously. Exactly.
Yes, of course.
Right?
Of course. No,
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So we think really then, if I have this right, that at the moment, Vlad the Invader doesn't need to reach for the nuclear arsenal against Ukraine.
Not at all.
But that he's put in place a legal framework around the new areas of Russia, if I can use that phrase.
Yes.
That potentially one day could come into play in that regard. But in the meantime, what we're really looking at is a degree of saber rattling being identified where it may not exist. That's your sort of your sort of take on it.
I think I don't hear any Russian nuclear saber rattling. I hear Russia kind of actually responding in quite a tolerant way to a lot of Western saber rattling and a lot of obvious Western provocations. Again, the notion of someone needing an excuse to use nukes on their doorstep. Again, when we used nukes, it was thousands of miles away from our shores. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
With just empty ocean in between, and we used them so that we wouldn't have to commit a lot of battlefield troops. That was all. We weren't about to get invaded. We're nothing like that, right? So now, you flip it around, and in my estimation, I'm seeing a leadership that's conducting itself with a great degree of patience in the face of obvious provocations. Again, I know we're
Yeah.
going to get to the pipeline issue in a moment, but that's what I see. But I think the legal framework is not so that he has the excuse to use nuclear weapons. By the time any leader is ready to push that, or to turn that key, or to turn those launch keys, okay, every legal framework is more or less out the window anyway. That's just how that is. You are no longer in the realm
Yeah.
of law courts. You are in the
Yeah.
realm of history. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so I've had a few calls lately
Mm.
about Soviet Central Asia, and because, as you probably will have seen, Azerbaijan started throwing some stuff towards Armenia again.
You talk about the Nagorno-Karabakh. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And then within about 3 or 4 weeks of that warming up, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan were also trading rounds over a disputed border area.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the question that was being posed was, to what extent is Russia's involvement in Ukraine so all-consuming that the former Soviet Central Asian republics were going to take the opportunity to settle some scores while Russia's back was turned.
Mm.
And how would this, I mean, from point of view of me providing some thoughts to people, how would this potentially affect investments and business within those areas?
Mm.
And so I was having a little look at this, and one thing that really struck me was that as Azerbaijan and Armenia started trading blows, their response to that, bearing in mind there's 2,000 Russian peacekeepers stationed in disputed regions of Armenia, so they're in kind of in harm's way, but the response to that was for those two countries to take themselves off to a mediation at the United Nations.
Mm.
Whereas previously, their big brother has come and said, play nice, folks.
Well, wait a minute.
Do you see what I mean? And I was really struck by that change in, if you like, geopolitical direction on the part of those countries, that they weren't looking automatically to Russia.
I see.
They were looking across to New York, which I thought was unbelievable.
I see what you mean, but wait a minute. Wasn't there a meeting called in Samarkand?
Yeah, there was.
Right.
Yeah, there was.
And
it was the upshot of that it went across to the UN.
Right. So I think that's where Russia wielded its influence, and I think they're happy to do that. Remember, you see, people forget that Russia's happy to resort to international bodies for mediation of disputes and for certain kind of investigative functions and so on and so forth. I mean, it's Russia that you hear calling for, okay, let's have an investigation. Let's get the IAEA in here. When the unpleasantness jumped off with canisters of something in Syria, in what was it, Duma and Khan Sheikhoun, wasn't it the Russians saying, let's get some international agencies in here. Let's hold off on shooting the place up anymore until we figure out what exactly happened. So I'm not surprised that it went to the UN, but I think that the meeting in Samarkand is interesting precisely because it's Russia playing a regional stabilizing role, that say we want to have our friends, the Iranians, come. That's significant, of course, because Tajik, as I understand, the Tajiks are actually a Persian ethnic group, right? Tajikistan exactly right. is the place of the Tajiks. Yeah. Okay, Tajik is a Persian language. Okay, so it's like, we're going to bring our friends from Iran. We're going to bring our friends from Turkey. Okay, because Turkey obviously has an interest in this area as well, obviously, right?
Turkey has a lot of interest.
A lot of interest. Okay, now think about this. This is in marked contrast. See, I'm thinking about this in terms of two ways of doing things that are being played out on a very public theater, okay? And the Russian way of doing things played out in that, okay? In other words, imagine if the United States were called on to try to mediate a dispute like that. Well, right away, we would get up on our high horse and we can't talk to the Iranians because the Iranians are this and that and there, right? And we can't talk to this person and that person or whatever. And what Russia said was, who has interest in this region? Who has skin in this game? Okay, come on to the
Yes.
table. Let's talk about this. And then it gets referred to the United Nations. I think that played extremely well into the image that Russia is very successfully painting of itself with our help as a body that, whether you agree with it or not, can at least be trusted to follow the agreed upon rule sets. Okay? And increasingly, by the way, the West is painting a picture of itself as a body that cannot be trusted no matter what the rule set is. If they decide they don't like you, they'll seize your ships with no legal framework. They'll steal your money with no legal framework. They'll launch a military operation with no legal framework. They'll even blow up your infrastructure with no legal framework in place. And so who is this meant to persuade? It's not meant to persuade us. It's meant to persuade the people in that region, I think, and the leaders in that region, that Russia can be trusted as a party to kind of use its soft power to get the disputants into a place where they can work things out. And I think it seems to me that it's so far it's successful.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. I mean, I think that it's certainly the case that the exchange of fire has quietened down over there between the four countries in their two respective confrontational pairings, and so it may be precisely as a result of the mechanism you cite. Yeah, you may well have it absolutely right.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I think the key thing is what happens next, because these folks looked like they were getting out of hand, and then by whatever mechanism they were calmed down.
Mm-hmm.
But what are they going to do next? So we'll have to watch with some interest.
Yeah.
So I said to you the other day in a message, watch out for some explosions from North Korea.
Mm.
I don't know if you keep an eye on the website 38 North.
I don't.
Okay, so this is a North Korea monitoring. This is an agency monitoring, private agency monitoring North Korea, and they've seem to have some really good sources, but equally they also use open source satellite imagery. And one of the things they do with it is they're always watching for change in known hotspots of military activity.
Sure.
To see if the North Koreans are up to something, and over the years they've actually scooped, quite a few occasions, some pretty good stuff. And what they're flagging, what they started flagging, was it 21st of September, is some chatter they'd picked up from defectors, cross-referenced with some construction activity in satellite photographs, and a couple of statements made by the North Korean leadership, and they'd strung these things together, and they came up with an interesting analysis which suggests that North Korea is about to launch a ballistic missile submarine.
Interesting.
Which would be quite a thing. And their analysis is, I don't know if you're in front of your computer and you want to go to the webpage, but it's 38 numerals north.org.
Mm.
And what they do is you come up with the sort of latest articles, and it's the Sinfo South Shipyard is the it's the third article down.
Okay.
And if you scroll down, you've got some satellite imagery interpretation and so forth. Now, the reason I flag this is because we're talking at the outset of the lowering the bar for use of nuclear weapons. As we know, the North Koreans have got the ability to detonate nuclear bombs,
Yes.
and they've got the ability to make ballistic missiles of a certain quality, range, and accuracy. But they haven't necessarily strung those two things together in a way that would cause, for example, the United States a problem.
Correct.
But if they can put a fairly crappy nuclear warhead on a fairly crappy ballistic missile on a submarine,
Yeah, that's a
and
little
they
bit of
can
a
park that, off the coast of off the coast of Frisco, that suddenly means they don't have to be very good to be able to cause an awful lot of trouble.
this is a
Now,
very good point. Yeah.
so the reason I was flagging this to you was simply because one of the things that exercises my mind anyway is at what point might North Korea, do something or be about to do something that would necessitate or justify or sponsor the US just going and hitting it with something. And it's the same question with Iran and Israel that you and I have chewed over before.
Sure.
At what point is the risk of a capability so high that you just have to do a preemptive strike to take it out of the game? And in my view, I can't imagine anything more likely to sponsor a US strike on North Korea, or even on just this particular target, than if it's built itself and is about to put to sea a ballistic missile submarine. I just can't see that being something that you folks could tolerate. Because once it's underwater, it's gone.
It's gone. That's right. Well, so here's the yeah, that's certainly yes. I mean, I think ballistic missile submarines are inherently looked at a certain way. They're inherently destabilizing.
Yes.
Now, so your question was, at what point? What is it that at what point would North Korea do something that? Well, listen. Part of the problem here is that we, the United States, we've painted ourselves as being unpredictable. Okay. So I don't have a good answer to that because no one really knows that you if you talk to people around the world, you get the sense that the overriding sense is that you never really know what the Americans are going to do. Okay. Now, I would argue that is destabilizing. Okay. It's clear to me that North Korea listens to its patron, which is China. Okay. So the North Korean government will get up and, make some noises and say some threatening things and what have you. But at some point on a back channel, that the Chinese are going to, they're going to get a phone call from the Chinese and they're going to be like, hey, calm down.
Absolutely.
Just calm down. Okay. Because again, at the end of the day, we have to fall back and put this in a wider context. This is not, it's only through the American lens of kind of constant kind of sub rosa conflict and kinetic response that we forget that ultimately the emerging great powers in this region are trying to emerge as great trading and economic powers, not as great force projection powers. Okay. I'm not that impressed with China's Navy. I'm not impressed with their aircraft carriers. I'm likely to be even less impressed with the new North Korean submarine. As you say, it doesn't have to be very competent, in order to pose a threat. But at the same time, it's not as if it's not magic. We have sensors too. We have anti-submarine warfare too. We have minefields as well, and so on and so forth. So I think, on the whole, The question of what should the Americans do about this? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that. I think it tends to get us into all kinds of trouble as Americans when we're always asking what we should do about what someone else is doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
Right,
No, I totally agree with you.
right,
I wouldn't put it as a personally. I mean, I wouldn't. I agree with you, but I
yeah.
wouldn't frame it like that. It's from my point of view. What's interesting is what might the Americans do?
What might we do exactly? Right,
Might this be a red line? And
right.
honestly, uh, they've had a that we know they have submarines, okay, and we know that they're interested in the technologies they're interested in for all the right reasons. But the simple reality is that I just wonder whether this might be a red line for the US, that it can't let that thing put to sea, but maybe would rely on picking it up once it is at sea, and it then meets with an unfortunate accident, as submarines sometimes do.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
maybe that is an option, that they could keep it, well, as you say, sub rosa.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
um,
with. I'm sorry to say that with my. I mean, I love my country, but my government's another matter. I mean, with the U.S. leadership, it's no longer a question of red lines. It's a question of red mines. Do you know what I'm saying? There are these things
yeah,
underground, and no one knows what's going to set. No one knows what's going to set the Americans off. You know.
no,
So I just don't know. I not now. To be honest, I don't think. I don't think we're going to do anything about this, really. At least, and other than whatever things we might do on the clandestine side, but I don't think we're going to do anything about this. And because here's the thing, I keep talking about the Ukraine conflict as our Suez, but you see, it's people. Even to the extent that people might agree with me, it's not clear because it hasn't finished unfolding yet. Now, assuming that some unfortunate incident doesn't kick us into full-blown hot nuclear war, I think when all is said and done, we will find that this was the war, this was the conflict, I should say. This was the international series of events that, just like Suez did with your country, drove home the fact that we're no longer what we thought we were. Okay?
mm,
There is no danger of America coming in hard, and kind of above the parapet, so to speak, on the side
mm.
of Ukraine. It's not going to happen. Why? We don't have the logistics for it. We don't have the skill for it. Actually, we don't. We've been fighting these Indian fighter wars for years and years and years and years and years. We've forgotten how to do maneuver warfare. We've forgotten how to do proper logistics. We just don't have it. We can't look. We're almost out of several key munitions because we sent a bunch of them to Ukraine.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's
No. Well, the UK is
pathetic,
running low
right?
on ammo for sure.
Exactly, right. So
Mm, mm.
so and we're seeing that as wishful thinking in Western policy rags notwithstanding, Russia doesn't seem to be slowing down its production at all. They can outproduce us all day and all night. So, you look at that, you look at China, it just, we can, yes, in a, I would say that in a squad level firefight, we might be the best there is, okay? But that's the thing. These kind of, the kinds of conflicts that we're staring down now don't lend themselves to the American expertise in squad level firefights. I'm very sorry. Okay, a general, retired Colonel Douglas McGregor
Yeah.
cited this brilliant quote that I hadn't even known about, which is, "A ship's a fool to fight a fort." Okay, which means, look, you're traveling over there in some vessels, and you want to do? What, you want to jump in and invade Taiwan? You want to push China around? And you're in a ship and they're on land. They're sitting on their entire supply chain. What's the matter with you? They're gonna sink us. Okay, they're just, so that's out. We don't have the logistical throw to just put a whole lot of heavy weapons into the middle of Europe and go at it. Why would we? It doesn't make any sense. I think actually, here's a funny thing. Here's what I really think. I think that elements of the American deep state and just the not even the deep state, just the superficial state, the foreign policy establishment, would like to use this conflict or these series of conflicts to the extent they can undermine the European bloc economically. We're undergoing a decline. That's true. But they just and Russia seems to actually be ascending as a trading power, as an economic power. We can't do anything about that. We can try, but we can't really. What we can do is we can just pull down Germany, and we can pull down the EU, and we can pull down the euro, and that's I think that's going to be our strategy going forward. I don't think. And nothing kinetic is going to happen other than clandestine mischief, in my estimation. I could be wrong, but that's going to be my guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, that's fine. I thought you'd like that, and it certainly captured my interest
This is
the idea.
fascinating.
Yeah, because it gets back to this point of the lowering of the bar, and I think one of the things that, if North Korea does have a nuclear capable ballistic missile submarine, that absolutely takes us closer to things we don't really want to.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. Do we? I mean, you mentioned their missile technology, right? And from what we know, their nuclear warheads are relatively large and not as reliable as one might want. Okay, in other words, they even when they go bang, they don't necessarily give the yield that you would expect from a physics package of that size, and that makes sense. One, they're new at it. Two, they're probably how can I put this? Any scientific industrial establishment where you can get shot for pointing out problems or in prison for pointing out problems in good faith isn't going to give you very high quality hardware. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to be very
exactly. They're also very heavily sanctioned as well.
They're very heavily sanctioned. It's hard for them to get.
So
now,
for all these reasons, their potentialities are deliberately very reduced.
Very reduced. Now, here's my question to you. What is your take on their ability to actually how can I put this? Well, are they capable of building a rocket that can hold a nuclear warhead that is small enough to even fit on a submarine? Can they do that?
I don't think that they can. But I say that as somebody who really doesn't know what he's talking about in this area at the right level of detail. Your intelligence services are the people who, the South Korean intelligence, could probably answer that question. The last I heard, or the last I read, was intelligence assessments that said they were some way away from being able to put something on a ballistic missile at all, let alone that would fit the bore of something you'd find in a submarine.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I kind of always go back to the engineering fundamentals. It's hard. Right. Building these things is hard. Building them small is even harder.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. So I think I would like to think the immediacy of that capability is just not there. But having said that, if you have a ballistic missile submarine that puts to sea, you're not going to know really what it's carrying. Put it this: you wouldn't bet your coastal cities on it. At least I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. So, well, I think maybe we get to the pipeline, do we?
Yeah, I think it's about that time.
I just sent you a message. Okay.
Let me see.
From the little article in the Respected Sea Power magazine.
Sea Power.
Baltops 22.
Baltic operations.
June the 14th, 2022.
Oh, look at that. EOD mobile unit.
Yeah, keep going down. Third paragraph. Experimentation was conducted off the coast of Bornholm. Where did the explosions just go off, Mike?
Wow.
Wow.
Isn't that something? Isn't that
the only
something?
known military capability anywhere near that island that wasn't Danish or Swedish or something,
right,
was the US of A.
US of A.
Just 4 months ago.
That's
3
right.
months ago.
That's right. Isn't that something?
And they were looking at underwater explosive technology.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Did they do it by accident?
Yeah, exactly. Come on now. Jesus Christ. That is fascinating, is it not? Wow.
I mean, what are the three ingredients of solving a murder? What was
means, motive, and opportunity.
Opportunity.
Well, I mean, look, it's
all boxes ticked.
All boxes ticked. Well, I mean, look, this is a very interesting article, but of course, I didn't need this to tell me that it was almost certainly the case that we blew up that goddamn pipeline. I mean, I heard the usual suspects chirping up, talking about, well, the Russians blew up their own pipeline, and that's just abject nonsense. This is a Russian gas pipeline. If they want to hold something over Germany's head, they can just close a few valves off. Come on, why would you blow up infrastructure? It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
But it does make sense for us to have blown it up, because if we thought that the Germans were getting cold feet, that they were maybe going to back down off their ridiculous sanctions position and play ball with Russia, then this would be a way to essentially ensure that they can't back down now, simply because, even if they say, okay, no more sanctions, there's, at least that as a way of the Nordstream pipeline as a way of getting oil, getting gas, is no longer on that's no longer on the menu, right? So that's it seems obvious to me that we did that.
Yeah. So the dots really start, I suppose, with February the 7th, before the invasion.
Yep, I remember that.
President Biden: if Russia invades, then there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
Right.
Reporter asked him, back in the days when you could ask him questions, but how will you do that, sir, exactly, since the project is in Germany's control? Mm-hmm. His response was, I promise you, we will be able to do that.
Yep.
So that was the first thing. And then we have the fact that there is no gas flowing.
That's right.
No gas was ever flowing through Nord Stream 2. Mm-hmm. There's nothing flowing through Nord Stream 1. Mm-hmm. Russia is super incentivized to keep those pipelines functional, because it as the winter closes in, it weakens Germany's resolve potentially. I mean, all this business about, their reserves are full. Yeah, they've got, 14 days at full reserves?
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's not like entire laughable. Winter's worth.
That's
it just gives them a bit of buffer in case there's a ship late or something.
That's exactly right.
It really is. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So we have this, and then just on the 17th of September, Vlad himself said that as far as he was concerned, under the right conditions, gas flows could be restarted immediately. Mm-hmm. And when he said the right conditions, of course, he meant the obvious, the right geopolitical conditions.
Correct.
And, Russia would only have blown up Nord Stream 1. If it was going to blow up a pipeline, the Telegraph's, one of the Telegraph's, in inverted commas, best defense analysts, close inverted commas, he said that the reason Russia would gain is because it would demonstrate its capability to blow up the new pipeline between Norway and Poland, and the pipeline between Norway and the UK. But we know it can do that.
Exactly.
It doesn't need to prove it. We know it can do
Well,
that.
more to the point. More to the point. Why wouldn't they just blow the pipeline up? Like,
Exactly.
it's
Why
like
would you say we're in the pipeline blowing up business, so you better redouble your security checks on your pipelines?
that's right. So
Why
if
would
we,
it do that? I mean, it's just laughable.
it's
It's
that right.
it's embarrassing. So the Russians, if they'd really wanted to do it, they'd have blown up Nord Stream 1,
And they would
and
have
then they
blown.
could have
They
had
would have
the
blown up.
joke.
And then, by the way, they might have if they were feeling frisky, they might have blown up Baltic Pipe. What have they called
Yes,
that?
exactly.
Right. You know what I'm saying? That
Yeah,
other one, right? The
exactly.
one that's feeding
And then they say,
Poland from Norway.
I don't know who's done this. Perhaps it's environmental terrorists because we like pipelines. But they wouldn't have blown up Nord Stream 2 as well, which wasn't even commissioned, because
Right.
they still would like to have the ability
Of course.
to bring that one about, because it's a huge political win
Well, of course,
of doing it.
of course we have to remember, right, that as much as people talk about weaponizing energy and weaponizing food. First of all, humanity has been fighting total war for decades now, and in total war, you weaponize everything.
Yes.
So as far as I'm concerned, of course, if you're at war, you weaponize what you have. So that's one. I'm not especially squeamish about that. That's one. Two is that people forget that at the end of the day, they want to sell these resources, and they don't particularly care who they sell it to. We're the ones who are squeamish about who we sell things to. We're the ones who say, "Whoa, I don't know. Do you use the correct gender pronouns in your public schools? Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you believe in democracy? Do you have we're the ones who are very, very, very touchy about who gets the privilege of buying our stuff from us. Russia doesn't care.
Yeah.
So and what they were saying, which made perfect sense to me, was, well, listen, if you're going to put sanctions on us, then, and if you're going to steal our resource, if you're going to literally steal our money from where it's deposited in funds around the world, then guess what? If you want any more oil and gas, you got to pay in rubles. Well,
yes.
You can call it reasonable or not, but that's what I would have done, of course. They're not stupid.
Exactly.
Well, what are you kidding me? Right. So now, provided 100%. You pay them in rubles, it's like they're happy to sell it to you. And then the whole reason why Germany was looking at decreased flows was because, well, guess what? We signed contracts with other people. I mean, after all, this is a zero-sum resource at the end of the day. So okay, we have a certain amount of gas coming out of these fields. Okay, and guess what? India wants some. China wants some. This party and that party wants some. Okay, well, if Germany is squeamish, no problem. We'll sell it to other people. Now Germany comes back and says, well, yeah, we'd like to. I'm sorry, you're not going to get the same flows anymore. But the idea that Russia was somehow looking to hoard its oil and gas and not sell it to Europe is nonsense. Do you know what I'm saying?
I must admit, I just don't understand that line of thinking, because it's only useful to Russia if they actually sell it.
Exactly. Well, listen, this is what I've said. I've been saying this for years, and recently I just said it again on my Twitter feed. Racism makes you stupid, and the sheer stupidity of so much of the analysis on this front is to me, I have a hard time attributing it to anything other than like raw kind of anti-Russian race hatred. When you point out that such and such a move would not be rational, then they say, well, these people are not rational because they're just, why would Russia blow up its own pipeline? Well, they're Russian. they do crazy things all the time because that's how they are. Okay. But no, I think this is an interesting, at the very least, it's a very interesting turn of events. I think.
Yes.
It ultimately, of course, it's not going to hurt the Russians that much. Well,
they will find other markets for their gas.
They'll find other markets for their gas. That's all. Yeah.
Certainly, for sure.
Yeah.
But the scale of the problem from this action, I think, further underlines the fact that it wasn't Russia.
Yes.
And let me explain that. I was talking to somebody yesterday who he's an engineer, and he was saying, if it is the case that what's being reported has happened, namely these things have been blown up So fairly substantial holes have been put in these pipelines. He was saying that firstly, all the gas within the system that's kept there to keep the pipelines pressurized, that's all going to come out. Fair enough. That is what we're seeing. But it's going to be replaced by seawater.
Yes.
And there is no design requirement for undersea pipelines that the interior pipelines be sleeved against corrosion caused by salt water.
Correct.
So the German newspaper Tagesspiegel is reporting today sources from the German security agencies saying that they think the pipelines will be rendered permanently unusable.
Yeah.
And imagine how long it's taken to build those things. I mean, years, right? So it's taken years to build them. In Nordstream 2, just to give you, in case you or anybody listening to this in future is not familiar, this thing is 770 odd miles long, but it's a 48-inch pipe. That's a big pipe. That's not a quick thing to install in a depth of water. And it takes something along the lines of 3 years or so it took to lay the underwater sections of that.
Yeah.
So if they started now,
right,
and they're not going to start now,
right?
It's 2025 before you've got those gas flows back.
Yeah.
How? And of course, no one's going to start that until the present war is resolved and the relations have normalized, if they ever do.
That's correct.
So that's it. That pipe supply from Russia to Germany has gone permanently. Now, does that in any plausible way benefit Russia? The answer is, of course not.
Right.
It certainly benefits people who want Germany to keep buying their gas from somewhere other than Russia. And anybody who wants that as a strategic outcome is the incentivized party to demolish those pipelines.
Yes, except that I'm with you as far as that it doesn't help Russia. I would say that as far as wanting Germany to buy its gas from elsewhere, keep in mind Germany doesn't have. To me, the decision to blow up that pipeline was not a decision to force Germany to get its gas from elsewhere.
No,
it was a conscious decision to destroy the German economy. Well, really to destroy the euro.
Oh,
that's what that was. That's what. And why do I say that? Is because first of all, Germany's not going to make up the difference with LNG from the United States. It's not going to happen. There aren't enough ships because as you know, these are specialized ocean-going vessels that carry LNG. There aren't that many ships in the world to make up that difference, and there aren't enough regasification terminals to make that happen. Regardless, it cannot happen. It is a logistical impossibility to make up the lack of pipeline gas with shipborne gas. The shipborne gas you do get will be much more expensive regardless. Now, what does that do to German manufacturing? What does that do to German industry? Right? I mean,
yes.
We've talked about this before. What is the biggest line item expense for an aluminum smelting plant? Electricity.
Yes.
Electricity, energy, right?
Yes.
So now all of a sudden the cost of electricity goes up by 50%, and we're talking about much more than 50%. You run the risk of destroying whole swathes of profit, whole swathes of industry at one stroke. So this to me was not about forcing Germany to get its gas somewhere else. There is no somewhere else. There is no somewhere else. The whole reason why Germany was getting cold feet on this Ukraine matter was because they talked a big game about getting gas from somewhere else, and they came up snake eyes every time. Okay? So This was a conscious decision to destroy the German economy. to make sure that it would be. I mean, let's be fair. The Germans, the Greens in the German cabinet did a great job of, got most of the way there, certainly, with their ridiculous, with the Energiewende, and you could say going back right to at post Fukushima, the Energiewende was just a disaster. That was a shit show. Okay, but this was like, okay, 100%, your economy is going to go down. That's what this was. And to me, that's extraordinary. It's extraordinary for us to have, for our government to have done that. But that seems like exactly what they did do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listening to you talk, I'm thinking about a contrary narrative here. I mean, perhaps it was Greta Thunberg keeping Germany honest.
Miss greenhouse gases are bad, decides to breach a 48-inch methane carrying pipe underneath the, really?
Come on, Mike, you're an American. You know that the ends justify the means.
Touche, my friend. Touche.
So, but so we would both point the finger at the US of A.
Yes, sir.
I did wonder if it might be Ukrainians that did it.
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, but they could only have done it with technical assistance from the United States. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that they have the capabilities to do that on their own. I mean, this is we're looking at the depths. You and I talked about this a little bit earlier. We looked at the depths involved, and this is not a trivial matter. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's not. But
it's a very demanding technical dive with explosives in tow, right? So yeah.
It really wouldn't be easy, and it is a very heavily monitored bit of ocean. That
correct.
I mean, it really is. If you had a boat static over the Nordstream pipelines, and let's face it, it's not like NATO military planners wouldn't have been alive to this possibility.
Yes.
So the idea that nobody was on some kind of a lookout for suspicious activity around pipelines, and indeed, you've probably seen the news reports suggesting increased drone activity around some of the onshore pipe stations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, as I understand, there was or there is an American warship keeping station some distance away. So, we put it this way: we have assets in the area.
Yes, exactly.
And
exactly. Yeah. So it does seem really unlikely that somebody's pulled this off under everybody's noses. But I come back to this U.S. operation exercise in June. Yeah. I mean, look, if it was the U.S., it's been done by Navy Special Forces divers, right?
Yes.
Or maybe using some kind of underwater drones to place charge or whatever it happens to be. But it's been done by assets like that. That's precisely the assets they had in the area in June. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy writing in the Telegraph, a guy called Dominic Nichols. He's ex-military intelligence or ex-MI6. I never really know which, but he understands how the world works, right? He says that this could have been set up months ago. And he said that without any sort of, I think, conscious reflection on Boltops 22.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about, Russia could have done this months ago. He's pinned it squarely on them. Yeah. But the fact is, if the people who understand how these things can be done say that it could have been set up months ago, right. And we know that months ago the precise capability was in exactly this location.
Right.
Regardless of, if that was a Chinese ship, okay, there in June, we'd be saying the Chinese did it. If it was a Russian ship, we'd be saying the Russians did it. The fact is the US ship doesn't make it any less likely that it was that ship that was part of the logistics operation to mine the...
Exactly, to mine the pipeline. Right.
And as we've discussed, our fingers would naturally start pointing in the direction of the US in any event.
Right. Exactly. So,
So I think it's an absolute shocker, actually.
it is. It's shocking. I mean, I have to say, I consider myself like an old, I mean, I'm somewhat jaded, I think, but I mean, this was shocking, even to me. I just thought, wow. So it's like that, huh? And again, I think to your earlier point, yes, this will create a problem for Russia, certainly. I don't think it's going to, but I don't think it's going to, it's certainly not going to have any influence, any effect on the outcome of this conflict in the Ukraine. Absolutely none. Like, definitely not. That should be obvious. And I think anyone planning an operation like this should know, it should be clear to them. Forget about what they, who they send out to tell us bullshit on the evening news. The people actually planning this kind of thing have to know that that's not the kind of thing that actually matters at all to a conflict like this. Okay. And by the way, I don't even think, in terms of threat to infrastructure, I would bet you, even though maybe no one's going to do anything now, but certainly there are probably things the Russians can do to prevent that entire length of underwater pipe from going bad. In other words, yeah, you're going to shut off the methane flow, but for that matter, you can keep pumping air into it until you manage to cap the thing, and then figure out how to basically keep that sealed.
I just wonder if you can, because the volumes are so huge.
Well, they're pumping methane into it, or they were. Okay, so if you can pump methane into it, you can pump some other gas into it, like air.
I wasn't sure if they were pumping methane into it, if that was just the pre-pressurized methane in the sort of gaseously sealed stretch of it.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is, ultimately, when the pipeline is operating, you're going to be pumping methane into it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So you can pump something else into it, right? Keep pumping whatever mix of gases into that pipe. Keep the seawater out until you can get a crew down there, cap the thing off, and then you'll essentially have and you cap off the other end, the onshore end. Then you have a pressurized tube underwater until someone gets the money and the political will together to go in to fix the goddamn thing.
No, that makes perfect sense. Sorry, yeah.
But regardless, this obviously is aimed at Europe. There's a guy named Tom. I don't know if we may both have watched this guy, Tom Luongo. Have you checked him out at all?
That's not ringing any bells.
Luongo. My friend Sebastian Seb Abacakis he does the Not the BBC podcast, did a talk with him a while ago.
Yeah, I know Seb.
Yeah. So he did a talk with him. And he's got his own channel, and what Tom's got his own channel. Anyway, he was talking about how elements of the U.S. deep state and elements of the kind of U.S. financial elite actually are not as into the whole WEF Euro cartel thing as we might like to think. In other words, we can posit that Jamie Dimon from Chase Bank is a scumbag, but by the same token, he's not necessarily inclined to let some creepy German eugenicist run the table on him. Yeah. Right? So, you know what I'm saying? So it's like Chase isn't necessarily on our side, but nor is Chase necessarily on their side. So when I talk about the impulse to shut down the euro, or to kind of hold the WEF project under the waterline, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. And it certainly isn't that these people have our best interests as citizens at heart any more than the other people do. It just means that that's the kind of thing that happens. Like, the deep state is not a monolith. The there are things going on behind the scenes that that look like a kind of an internal, internecine conflict. So
Yes.
this is
Yes.
like the one segment of the globalist elites basically taking pot shots at another segment of the globalist elites. This is fascinating.
Yes.
But I can't see Europe is in a bad way. And here's the other thing. The other interesting thing is because uh, you all just voted recently to leave the EU, but you're still kind
Yes.
of in the orbit of the EU. And we're noticing these rumblings going on around Europe, people pushing back against the EU. Viktor Orban has been making noises. Now the brothers of Italy have come up. Giorgia Meloni is the new Italy's new PM, and competent analysts have said, I think correctly, that she is going to have a work cut out for her, and the brothers will have the work cut out for them, figuring out how to chart a new path without incurring the wrath of Germany, because Germany has the whip hand, right, as far as EU policy and the euro. Well, what does it mean when Germany itself is now holed below the waterline? What does that mean about Germany's ability to turn around and impose whatever on the Italys of the world, on the Greeces of the world, and so on and so forth? It may mean that they're crippled in their ability to do that. So I think that's, this is also a fascinating line of thinking to just, what are the possible knock-on effects of this just in terms of the internal power balance in Europe? What does it mean for the EU as a body?
Yeah, I think these are really deep questions, and I'm afraid with my my relatively simple brain, I hadn't actually got past the first base of who did it. To be perfectly honest with you, but having thought about it, I'm really very confident that it wasn't the Russians, and
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
that regardless of who did it other than the Russians or why they did it, the simple fact that there is another actor out there that's prepared to do something with the repercussions as huge as they are going to be for this is a striking, or should be a striking, wake-up call.
Yes, it
for most people in their quiet slumber as they drift along through life, because this is,
yes,
I think it changes the world. Actually, I think it's so big that it changes everything,
I think so.
because
Yeah.
we don't know what the ramifications are going to be, but we now know we live in a world where people are going to do things like that, and they might not be the Russians doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
yeah.
for most people, that's going to be an absolute shock.
I think so.
An
Yeah.
absolute shock.
Look, I think that's why most people are refusing. Most people are insisting, maybe not most people, but so many people are insisting against all logic and reason that the Russians did it. Because if, as is almost certainly the case, the Biden administration did it, then what does that mean? I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, listen,
I know.
I never thought very much of those people, but for those who do, what does that mean?
Well, I didn't think the Biden administration would ever get itself together to take a decision on this scale at all,
Yeah.
for a start. I mean,
Yeah.
just anyway. But for them to take a decision that would have been, the sort of thing you'd expect Donald Trump to do, if you see what I mean. If you suffer from Trump derangement syndrome,
Yeah.
and you say the Americans have just blown up the Nordstream
That's very
pipelines,
funny. That's
identify which president you think did that.
Everyone would blame
Everybody's going to
Trump.
scream Trump,
Everyone would blame
except
Trump.
it really wasn't
It
him.
really, really wasn't. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I mean, it's funny because so many of the things that everybody was afraid of Donald Trump doing, the Biden administration actually did. I mean, that's what's funny,
Yeah.
And this is just another example. I mean, this is an extraordinary kind of kinetic uptick.
It's a moment in history. It really is.
Yeah.
I heard somebody today suggesting that it was a new Franz Ferdinand moment.
I don't know if I'd go that
I
far.
honestly, I don't know if it's on that scale, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, it is a momentous thing. The full ramifications of which will take some time to work out.
Well, that's right. That's right. I mean, interestingly, by the way, speaking of ramifications, I just wanted to touch on another thing because I know that you and I are in the same place when it comes to um, turning a very skeptical eye on the pronouncements of our environmentalist friends.
Yes,
Um, so aside from the fact that an administration that's always screeching about climate change and greenhouse gases, again, has just breached a methane pipeline underneath the Baltic because Germany is now solidly in a corner, has been painted into a corner by this thing. It means that this is going to be another very bad winter for the green movement, especially in Europe, right? Because again,
yes,
the certainly the Ukraine conflict, the ridiculous sanctions policy, and now this imposed kind of shortage that's irreversible, right? The destruction of these pipelines. Um, all of this has just kind of front loaded the cost of the green agenda.
it has, it has. This is exactly right. This is what you and I were saying between ourselves a little while ago. What we're seeing now through the mechanism of the Ukraine war is we are seeing the sort of the front loading. They can no longer salami slice it. I think that was
That's
your
yes, sir.
phrase.
Yes, sir. That's
And
right.
everybody's seeing exactly now the nightmare of net zero unfold in quick time.
That's right.
And as you see from the change of administration in this country, you know, none of them are really, none of them are really making many noises about net zero.
No.
Instead, it's maxing out our fossil fuel resources on land and at sea.
Mm.
And assuming that the globalists don't succeed in bringing down the current UK government, I think we're going to make really great strides in the energy self-sufficiency world, because apart from anything else, what does blowing up undersea pipelines tell us, regardless of
Right.
who's doing it, is you can no longer have that as a component of your energy security mix.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's part of your energy insecurity mix. And incidentally, that also goes for the proposed electricity line from Morocco through Europe, conveying solar power from the Sahara.
Mm.
That's dead as well from that very perspective.
Interesting. Now you're saying that electricity line is dead only because um, people will reconsider building it, or because they'll fear sabotage, or what? What do you?
I think that uh, you'd have to have such a massive investment on board to make that happen.
Mm.
It's got to be nation scale actors providing that investment, and everybody's going to be looking through the world with one pair of glasses on, and those are the ones that filter out all energy that's not secure.
Right. I see what you mean.
Only
Yep.
secure energy counts for the vast majority of your grid supply. And so, everybody's going to be looking to within their own physical borders, and anything that has to be piped in
Mm.
by whatever means is now insecure. So that's the electric interconnectors between Britain and France and Britain and Holland, the gas pipeline from Norway. All of those things are now insecure.
Mm.
So if you look at just staying with the UK, if you imagine a world where all of those things are cut, as has just happened to the Nordstream pipeline, and as is perfectly technically possible, if that happens, we are completely screwed as a country.
Mm.
Completely screwed as a country, and wind and solar are not going to replace that. The only thing that's
Nope.
going to replace that is gas fired by our own gas and nukes fired by our own uranium.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's it. So
That's right.
energy security, which, by the way, some of us have been saying for about 15 years,
Yep.
is the only thing that counts.
Yep. That's right. You know, this is
There you go.
speaking of which, I wanted to round out our discussion because that was such a great segue. You know, you're talking about energy security.
Yes.
Um, earlier I mentioned the fact that that Russia is easily outproducing NATO in terms of munitions.
Mm.
And that in Russia, the other fact is that in Russia, real wages are actually rising.
Yeah,
Energy
that's a
costs are,
striking thing.
that's a striking thing, right? So after
Mm.
all these sanctions, real wages are rising, energy costs are falling. And even in the middle of this recession, it seems like the standard of living is holding steady or ticking up very slightly. The Russian central bank, okay, is looking to cool down the ruble just a little bit because they don't want it to get too hot. That's extraordinary as well. Now,
Yes.
the thing, and so as you mentioned, energy security. This is, we're always talking about the fundamentals, the foundations at the foundation of society, and it occurred to me that foreign policy types have underestimated Russia for a long time. And what they say is look at the size of Russia's GDP. But,
Yes.
but here's the thing. The way we calculate GDP is interesting because, of course, all the games we play on Wall Street with spreadsheets and fake wealth and usury and derivatives, all these things add to your GDP. But by contrast, you can have a very small GDP.
Yes.
But if that GDP is mostly fundamentals, in other words, if that
Yes.
GDP is you actually making stuff and extracting resources and refining oil into gasoline and what have you, then your economy is stronger.
It's durable.
It's
It's durable.
durable.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
And I think this is a
anti-fragile. Right.
this is a really important point. There is now a very, very clear differentiation to be made between durable economic fundamentals and vulnerable economic fundamentals.
Yes, sir.
And
That's
and,
it.
and it's energy security is a very, very good example
Yes.
of that. Absolutely.
Yes. At the end of the day, you can't wish it away. You can't magic it away with financial instrument with exotic financial instruments. You simply have to do the work, and you have to build the machinery and build the infrastructure and actually do it. And if you do it, you reap the rewards. And I think if anything good comes out of this, out of the current unpleasantness, it'll be a realization that that is really the only viable way forward is for Western societies to focus on the fundamentals of their economies. I'm always lamenting that the UK, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, deindustrialized itself on purpose for no good
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
used to be leaders
Absolutely.
in nuclear power. Now you barely have any nuclear infrastructure.
I know.
So if as we rebuild from this, if we're lucky enough to be able to rebuild from this, you know, I think that's something that people really have to keep in mind. It's like the fundamentals matter.
The fundamentals absolutely do matter, and I think there's going to require a complete rethink of foreign and security policies throughout the Western world,
Yes, sir.
which I have no doubt is already underway.
Yes, sir. I think that's right.
Great to talk to you, Mike.
This has been a great conversation. Thanks for taking the time.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
We'll see what unfolds in the next few weeks.
Indeed, and unfortunately, there'll be many more flashpoints to discuss.
There will. Take care, my friend.
Likewise. Take care. Bye now.